This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Because my mom is pretty feisty and outspoken. And my mom did not want any equipment cluttering her house. She did not want a hospital bed. If you brought in a walker or wheelchair with her, she would probably swear at them. So, and the hospice nurse said, Janet, you're the boss. You're the boss. This is your team. And you get to tell everybody what they have to do. We don't tell you what to do. You tell us what to do.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Cathy VandenHeuvel, host of the Caregiver Cup podcast, is talking with me about her caregiving experiences and how she learned what good hospice care should be. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
As a caregiver, you want comfort and dignity for your patient and convenience for yourself. The Quick Change Wrap offers all of that with a life-changing way to address male incontinence. It folds around the source of urine and wicks it away, protecting surrounding skin, clothing, and bedding. Use the Quick Change by itself or with an adult diaper for superior protection. A single caregiver can quickly change the wrap with no lifting or turning the patient. 800 hospitals use it. Now you can get it at home. Visit quickchange.com now. This episode is sponsored by the Death Doula Network International. Death Doula Network International has created an opportunity for death doulas to gain experience and confidence before they start doing the work of supporting people and families at end of life. DDNI is focused on building connections and growing the death doula industry. For more information, visit ddnint.com. Now here's today's episode.
Cathy VandenHeuvel is a fellow podcaster, which is how I got acquainted with her, and we've sort of swapped interviews. I talked about hospice on her podcast, the Caregiver Cup, and today she's with me talking about her caregiving experience and her experience with hospice with her mom. Cathy VandenHeuvel is a caregiving coach. She is helping women who are caring for a loved one navigate their caregiving journeys so they can live a life they feel good about. She's the host of the Caregiver Cup podcast, and she also hosts Caregiver Circle groups, which is sort of like a support group for caregivers that meets remotely over Zoom. So you're going to hear about Cathy's story in our conversation today. She actually has been a caregiver for multiple family members, for her dad, who died of pancreatic cancer a few years ago, her mom, who died in fall of 2022, and her husband, who is currently healing and recovering after a stem cell transplant. So she's had a lot of different experiences. Her dad started her caregiving journey off. There were several obstacles to his caregiving experience, and they ended up not being able to utilize hospice because of honoring her dad's wishes about where he wanted to die. When she and her brother and sister received news that her mother also had cancer and was going to forego any further treatment, they became her caregiving team, just like they did with Cathy's dad. Because her location was different, they were able to team up with a hospice agency to provide care for her mom. Cathy wishes she had known more about hospice and palliative care so that she would have provided more support and gone into it more confident and not so fearful. And the way she talks about it is being able to look at a bigger picture, look more towards the end of life and not so much on a day-to-day management organizing basis. One of the things that you'll hear Cathy say is that she and her siblings felt it was really important to honor their parents' wishes at the end of their lives. And from everything they did to support each parent in different ways, you'll hear that they really did honor those wishes, honor her parents. And she continues to support caregivers through the podcast, the Caregiver Cup. And I think you're going to be inspired by her story. And if you've ever been a caregiver, you're going to relate to a lot of it. And if you're a hospice professional, you need to hear Cathy's story too. There's good message there, the good and the bad and the ugly about what we do and the mistakes that we make, but also the way we companion people as they care for their loved ones at end of life. So here's my conversation with Cathy VandenHeuvel. Cathy, it's so good to see you today. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Helen, for inviting me. And I feel like we're like best friends already since you've been on my podcast. And now I get the pleasure of being on your podcast in the Heart of Hospice.
I love it. I'm so grateful. It's good to get to talk to you. We have talked recently, but it's always nice to see your face again. So we're going to jump right in. Obviously, you've had vast caregiving experience. Your caregiving experiences with your parents were vastly different, very different. So yes. Tell me what those two different experiences were like and how hospice fit in with the care that your mother received.
Yeah. I don't know. I agree with you. They were vastly different. And it's hard to say good and bad because there was good and bad in both of them. But in 2017 is when my dad got the diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And I'll be honest with you, when you get that diagnosis and you get the words that he has 2 to 11 months to live, I didn't even think about end of life. I was thinking about the now. And then with my mom, who recently passed away on October 1st, when we started hospice, I didn't think about the journey of end of life. And so, with my dad, when he received the diagnosis, he decided and chose that he wanted to stay on this earth and spend as much quality time with my mom and dad. They were married 57 years and they were inseparable. So my dad chose to fight the fight with chemotherapy. It was extremely hard on him. I knew he was already in pain with the pancreatic symptoms. So having the chemotherapy, it was a lot of work for him and a lot of pain and suffering for him. He chose to fight that from October until January when he said his body could not handle it anymore. And at that time, he said he wanted to spend the rest of his life in the cabin up in northern Wisconsin. And that is about 2.5 hours from my home on a non-snowy winter. So I went ahead and played that supportive daughter role, which I'm very close to my parents. And so I traveled as much as I could to be there on weekends, take extra days off to spend time supporting my mom in her caregiving journey. And eventually, about end of February is when I made the decision that I was going to go ahead and be in the cabin with my parents as much as I possibly could. And when my dad switched to the location up in the cabin, they found out, he was getting palliative care in the hospital through chemotherapy and all of that kind of stuff. But then the palliative team had said, we need to look at hospice for your father now. And there was not hospice services available in the county where the cabin was located. So that was our first obstacle. It's like, okay, what do you do then? And so they searched and found the next county over didn't have hospice care either. And so they found an agency, and I don't even know, Helen, if they had training or not, but they had nursing services that could come in and go ahead and, provide services for us. Well, it wasn't a really good experience. And I almost consider it almost the worst case scenario when we had. At that point, we knew that my dad had to have a visit. And my dad was, I don't want anybody in my home. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. My family, I want to be with my family. So that was an obstacle in itself. And I can remember him stressing, sitting on the couch, waiting for the nurse to come in. And we looked out over the window of the kitchen and we saw the nurse pulling up in the driveway. And my first view of the nurse was she was smoking a cigarette in her car and with her notepad. And so right away, Cathy gets on the defensive because I'm like, okay, I'm not anti-smoking, but I just know from a health perspective, that's not what we want. And her appearance, I struggled with her appearance because it was definitely backwoods location. And so it was boots and a hat and a parka and not dressed like a nurse. So I right away, I told my brother, you need to meet her at the door and check her credentials. My poor brother, he's like, you need to make sure she's truly a nurse.
He was like the bouncer.
I know it. She came in and the first words out of her mouth is, Jim, that's my dad's name, you don't look sick. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Here we convinced my dad that the nurse was there going to be extra help for us and she's going to be able to help get rid of some of your pain and help you through all of this. And right away, the wall was up already. And then we explained that he looks this way sometimes, and then within an hour, he's really sick. And so it's up and down with pancreatic cancer until they're finally bedridden. And then she went ahead and talked about where he's going to be. And she talked about once you get bedridden, we're going to have to insert this catheter. And I hope I can say this on the podcast, and put it in your penis. And it's going to hurt at first, but this is going to help that you don't wet your bed. And at that point, I shut down. We finished the visit. She left. I called the nursing service and we canceled the nursing service. We did not want any of that. So at that point, we called the palliative team back that he was in Green Bay. And we said to them, is there another option? And we came to the decision, it was really hard, to have a telephonic palliative service through the entire care through my dad for the rest of his life. And so between my brother and my sister and my mom, we supported my dad through his journey to the end of life. I was lucky enough to have a sister that was a CNA. So she had the CNA knowledge. My brother had the heavy lifting and he was the gopher, for a lack of a term. He went at the prescription drugs at the pharmacy. We had everything done. And I was more of the advocate organizer and talking to the palliative team 2 or 3 times a day, working through all of the logistics. And we managed my dad's end of care life together as a banded team. It was not easy because none of us walked the journey before. None of us had an idea. I look back and said, oh, if we could have did things differently, we would have did this and this and this and this. But that was our experience with Dad. Now, it was the hardest of time, especially the last 18 years, but it was the most beautiful time too, because we propped my dad up. out of his bedroom window, and we propped him up, and my brother fed the deer outside of his window every day. And so we would look at the deer in the snow, and, the sunshine would come in, but we would be able to watch the wildlife with him until he was no longer able to function, which that was about a week. He was comatose for about a week before that, but it was very difficult. It was.
So before we move on to your story with your mom, there's so much to unpack with what you guys experienced. First, I want to say kudos to you and your siblings and your mom for what you did for your dad. Basically, you provided end-of-life care without a hospice team. You did it with no training. Thank goodness your sister was a CNA, because that's a huge help. But you respected your dad's wishes. He wanted to be in that cabin. If you had said, Dad, we can't do this unless we move you back somewhere else,
yeah,
he wouldn't have been able to die where he wanted to. Those memories that you obviously carry very close of your brother feeding the deer outside the window and your dad being able to be in this beautiful space that he loves so much, none of that would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad would have been forced to allow you to move him somewhere else. So that's an amazing gift. It's a very difficult thing to do for someone you care about, but that's an amazing job that you guys did for your dad. Now, as far as the nurse's appearance and her interaction with your dad, I won't unpack the words that are coming to my mind for that. I mean, I get appearances, right? And whatever the nursing staff's personal habits are, I'm kind of like you. I find that kind of stuff offensive. I prefer someone who knows a little bit more about healthy lifestyle choices.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give her that much. But sort of circumventing your dad and saying, this is what we are going to do, instead of asking, what would you think about this? Or here is an option if this occurs. Here's what we can do for you. To steal his autonomy in a way like that, of course, is terrible care.
Mm-hmm. I realize that. Looking back now, I know that because I went through the positive experience with my mom. But at that time, I didn't. And I didn't know anything about hospice care. I didn't even really know what hospice meant. I thought it was something people went into a home and they received hospice care in a facility.
Right. That's what most people think, that hospice is a place. When it's not, it's actually a philosophy of care. It's not so much about the place, it's about the type of care that's provided. Okay, so your experience with your mother, very different and very fresh, Cathy. So I'm remembering with you. Tell me your mom's name.
Yeah, her name is Janet.
Janet.
So we called her the Energizer Bunny because this woman was 80 years old and could still touch her toes. She would get up on ladders. She was so active all the time. But the lung cancer just kept fighting and fighting. She was diagnosed with lung cancer right after my dad died and went through radiation. And then it held its own for quite some time. And then when it came back, she knew it came back, didn't tell us that all her fatigue and stuff was causing it. And then when she went to the doctor confirmed it. And she said she didn't want to go through any more treatment. She was ready to go ahead and finish her life. And that was very hard to swallow from a caregiver perspective. But it happened so fast, Helen. It happened really fast. And maybe that's because of all of the things that I was going through at the time, because in 2022, my husband had a stem cell transplant because he was fighting his 5-year battle with lymphoma. And I didn't see that. I didn't want to maybe, or I didn't pay much attention to her fatigue until the summer. And then I knew this past summer of 2022 that things were getting worse. And so after her doctor's appointment, the doctor recommended that she refer her to palliative care. and they were going to have a nurse come in for a visit into her apartment. My mom was living independently. And so we sat at the kitchen table. I remember my sister wasn't able to be there, but my brother and myself and my mom were at the kitchen table with the hospice nurse and the social worker. We welcomed them into her home. We sat at the kitchen table. It was a 360 positive experience compared to my dad. The nurse came in and she focused in on my mom and said, "Hi, how are you doing? Tell me about yourself." Within 5 minutes, my mom was hugging her. She felt like she had a friend. It was all focused on her. Some of the words that, because my mom is pretty feisty and outspoken, and my mom did not want any equipment cluttering her house. She did not want a hospital bed. If you brought in a walker or wheelchair with her, she would probably swear at them. So, and the hospice nurse said, "Janet, you're the boss. You're the boss. This is your team. And you get to tell everybody what they have to do. We don't tell you what to do. You tell us what to do." And that just made my mom's, she sat up in her chair as tired as she was, and that made her feel so much better. But through the assessment, through the discussion, both the social worker and the hospice nurse agreed that palliative wasn't going to be the service they were going to provide to her. They knew she needed hospice care. And I didn't even know what that was. So they had to explain that, yeah, she is in the end of life. And we are going to manage her pain, but we're also going to go ahead and be with her on a weekly basis and come and do spot checks or even more. So that started it. I remember that evening driving back home in my car, bawling my eyes out, thinking that I probably only have 6 months left of her life, and not even really realizing at that time it was 1 month from that day that she had passed away. So it was really a fast progression, which was a blessing in disguise, but it was really fast. And so for me, I didn't even know what hospice was. And so I remember that first day when we were sitting at that kitchen table, there was a lot of paperwork. There was a lot of consent forms, a lot of education. There was a lot of discussion on I don't know what the official words are, but do not resuscitate orders. And what do you want from a chaplain service perspective? And have you thought about the funeral home? There was a lot of that. And so that was quite overwhelming. So that was the first visit. And so I could tell Mom was overwhelmed too, but she was very pleased. The second week, the nurse came back in. It was funny though. My mom's like, "I feel okay. You can cancel the nursing visit." And I had to explain to her, based on what I learned the week before, that if Medicare is going to cover this, Mom, the nurse has to come in every single week. And I didn't know that, but she had to. So the nurse came in the second week. And it was medicine education time. So the medicine was delivered to our home in this little box. And the nurse went through and educated us on the medication. And my mom's going, "I don't need any medication." And they went through the whole process. "We know that you don't, but we're going to have it here just in case. Where can we put it in your cupboard so that you don't see it and it doesn't stress you out, but it's there just in case?" And so Mom found a spot in the cupboard and we hid it, and we didn't have it there, but they talked about administering it, what we would need, who we would call, that kind of stuff. And so that was there. And luckily it was, because within the next week we were using the morphine.
Yeah.
And she did that. So I think hospice came just once a week, the first 2 weeks. After that, it was two visits the following week. And by the fourth week, it was every day, sometimes twice a day, because she was transitioning. But yeah, can I keep going with the beautiful gift?
Yes.
Yeah. So the last week was really, really hard. I was coming over in the morning and would unlock the door. I would be with her in the morning the first couple of weeks because mom was still independent. She walked up until the 4 days left. She walked. And then my brother would come midday and then I would come back in the evening. We worked out a plan, right? And well, there was by the beginning of the third week, she started calling people because the morphine, I think, was causing her to have different thoughts and stuff. She walked into the closet and didn't know where she was. And then she had fell once. And then at that point, we knew that we could not leave her alone. And the social worker was monitoring that the whole time. And so that was the time where it shifted. But on the flip side, it opened up a whole new possibility to having family visiting because we knew things were progressing pretty fast. The last week, she got to see every single one of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, except for the two in the service. And we had people visiting quietly throughout. We have pictures of her in the last, she was still smiling and really just while she was progressing. So that was the beautiful gift. And then within the last week, then my brother, sister, and I, just like we did up north in the cabin, we spent those last days and weeks together, laughing, crying, telling jokes over my mom's bedside, opening up photo albums and supporting each other. And what was really nice, Helen, is we took on the same role. Again, my sister took on the CNA role, and she was always positioning my mom and bathing and helping her get cleaned up. My brother was doing his thing by being the gopher and the strong person and stuff. And I was the one, had hospice on my phone, and I was calling and recording all of the drugs and setting my timers and all that kind of stuff so that we could go ahead and support mom. But what was really different is we were in town. We had the necessary support from the hospice team. They were walking us through everything. And what was really funny is that they were taking care of mom, but I think they were taking care of us more than my mom. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the way it works. That's the way good hospice is supposed to work. If my listeners could hear a smile, I've been smiling this whole time. You're talking about something really hard, and obviously the death of your mom is something that grieves you greatly. Yes. But to hear that you had such a good hospice experience, that's just amazing. We love hearing stories like that. Yeah. So a couple of things jump out at me. Your mom sounds like what in Texas we call a pistol.
Oh, yeah.
Which means, she knew her mind and she was independent, which is awesome. That's probably one of the reasons she was able to live independently and have so much quality of life. And apparently that independence meant a lot to her.
If you're a caregiver for your dad, brother, or son, you know how exhausting it can be, especially when trying to manage male incontinence. It's very difficult to provide the dignity and comfort he deserves. Let us introduce you to the Quick Change Wrap. It's an incontinence wrap that is effective, convenient, and will change the way you provide care to your male patient, for the better. The Quick Change Wrap folds around the source of urine and wicks it away, protecting surrounding skin, clothing, and bedding. If you're a single caregiver, you'll be able to change the wrap by yourself with no lifting or turning. There's hardly any disruption to your male patient. In fact, he doesn't even have to be awake. It takes just a minute or two for one person to change the Quick Change Wrap regardless of size, anatomy, or weight of the patient. Use the Quick Change by itself or with an adult diaper for superior protection. 800 hospitals use it. Now you can get it at home. Visit quickchange.com now. This episode is sponsored by the Death Doula Network International. Death doulas are always seeking ways to gain experience and confidence before they start doing the work of supporting people and families at end of life. The Death Doula Network International has created that opportunity. The organization provides a deep dive into practice to develop a death doula's skills. More than just death education and learning, the Death Doula Network International is creating heartfelt connections. Sign up for their Skill Mastery Education Workshop starting on June 3rd. The Immersive Skill Mastery Program is for doulas who have taken a basic foundational course and want to develop their skill set and build confidence in their death doula practice. DDNI brings a unique and dynamic energy to this learning based on personal connection, engagement, and humor. Find out more at ddnint.com. Now, back to the conversation.
When it came to the hospital bed, she didn't want it in there. A lot of patients don't like hospital beds in their homes, regardless of whether they have space or not, because there's such a big message that is sent with a hospital bed. If you've got a partner who's been co-sleeping with you for the last 50, 60 years, it's separation and isolation. It also says, I am sick to the point of needing so much care, a high level of care. And it's an invasion of that healthcare into your personal living space. Did your mom ever allow you to get a hospital bed?
No, we didn't. But what the nurse did is she went in and looked at the single bed my mom was staying at. So it was accessible from both sides. We bought a wedge to put between the box spring and the mattress. And so we could bring her head up when we needed to. But it happened so fast. When we did think we needed the hospital bed, she was already in her 4th week. And the nurse suggested, I don't know if we really need that, because at the point that she started becoming immobile, within the next day, she was not recognizing things anymore, and she became comatose. So I think in our situation, it happened so fast. Now, in my dad's situation, I wish we would have had that, because it was 18 days of my dad being immobile and comatose. So, but we didn't, because we couldn't get one in that county.
Sure.
But we did the same thing with my dad. We moved out the single bed. They had 2 single beds in their bedroom. And so we moved the single bed in the middle so that there was access from three ways. So when it came time to move and I don't know what it is, reposition them, we were able to do that. But it was extremely hard for my dad, because my dad, he was a sailor. He was in the Navy, so he swore like a sailor. But he wanted to get out of bed all the time. His feet were always wanting to move out of bed, but his upper body wouldn't move, but his feet would move. And so that was hard to take, because you didn't know if you were forcing him or if you were, so there was nobody to guide us through that emotion. Versus my mom, she stayed in bed when she knew she couldn't walk anymore.
Well, anybody that has ever taken care of somebody who's bedbound and they are in a double bed or a queen or a king size bed, that is back-breaking work.
Yes.
It is so difficult to take care of somebody. They're either in the middle and you have a caregiver on either side, if you had the luxury of more than one caregiver at a time, or they're on one side and somebody is kneeling in the middle of the bed to help provide the care. It is backbreaking work. I've done it. Yeah. And it's so difficult for a family. The reason I asked about that one particular point is because patients and families really do struggle with putting a hospital bed in. A lot of times it's a hard stop no from a patient because they don't want to allow it in. So I wanted to ask about that.
At the early beginning, when we had those discussions, I would have the discussion at the kitchen table with the hospice nurse. I would walk them down the hall out of my mom's apartment. And I remember talking to them about that. And they said, usually if the patient is denying the hospital bed, we make the decision more when they're not able to be mobile anymore, or immobile, and they're comatose or they're weak. We can have further discussion. To me personally, it would have been so much easier to have my mom she had an open concept kitchen living room from a sibling perspective because it got dark and dreary in that bedroom. And you have to sit in that bedroom with a small little window. And we sat on kitchen chairs around. And I remember my back and my hinder getting so sore from sitting there versus being in there. But you have to honor the wishes. And if the single bed was okay, then we made it.
Right.
But I remember my sister telling me all the time, bend your knees, because there are things that you don't think about that a nurse knows, and all of the experience that she had.
Oh, yeah.
Or putting that towel or a blanket underneath and using, instead of grabbing the body or grabbing your parent and bruising them, because that would be my first reaction. Okay, we'll pick you up by your armpits and slide you up. But that's not how nurses are trained. And so, I had a whole new perspective of nursing just from watching my sister.
It's obvious that the skills that each of you were able to bring to the care of your parents made the system work.
Yeah.
If your sister had not been able to do that, if you were not willing to correspond and organize and collaborate with the team, if your brother hadn't been there for all the extraneous pieces and the physical pieces of things, your system would have been off balance. You have to have all those pieces.
Yeah, so that's a blessing.
So if you could go back and have a do-over with your dad, or have one with your mom, what would you do differently about the experiences?
I think for me, with my dad, never looking beyond the cancer and the treatment and the next month, never looking at the end of life. I never thought to think about it earlier. And looking at that, because I think that would have helped. I think if anybody is dealing with somebody with stage 4 cancer, you don't want to go there and think about their death.
Sure.
But you don't even want to think about their last week or their last months. But if you can look at that piece and try to understand what options and services and opportunities there are, because my dad just said, I want to die in my cabin up north and I want all my kids there. Sure, we're going to be there, but what does that mean? What does that require? How does that work? And it worked out, but I can imagine Helen, I was scared to death because, and death is just a weird word to bring up because of this, but I recorded everything for my dad because there wasn't a service there. I had to be the one to call the coroner when my dad passed away.
Oh, wow. Because
you think about the hospice team taking care of that piece, the hospice team taking care of, the connection with them. But I was scared that we did something wrong. And that haunted me for about a week because, and I had my notebook and I had everything written down and what we did and everything because there was nobody managing that care professionally. Sure, the palliative team was advising us and recording each and every conversation, but what about those gaps? And so I went in with my mom with the same fear of, oh my gosh, we're here with mom. And that's what I didn't know. I'll back up in a minute. I'm just getting all excited here. But that's what I didn't know would happen with my mom. So I was recording everything with my mom, thinking that there's going to be a coroner coming over to my mom's house and interviewing me and asking me about the last hours and the last week and what happened and who I'm working with and all that kind of stuff.
So you felt like they would question you and basically to determine that the death was natural and you hadn't done anything wrong that caused a problem.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And should I give too much morphine? Because at what point, because it was really nice with my mom, I could call my mom to say we were giving her this dose per per your direction, but she seems really agitated right now. Is it okay to give another dose, or what can I do? And they would advise. But with my dad, you couldn't really call the palliative team in the middle of the night. It wasn't a service that we had. We had to wait until the morning.
Right.
So what I would do differently, I think, is I would have a better understanding. I think going into this so green, and I don't know if that's possible sometimes for people, but working with your doctor, finding out what the options are, having that discussion. And if you have a parent that doesn't want to hear it, I think I would have did, now that I'm talking out loud, Helen, I think I would have had a separate meeting with the palliative team.
Yes.
And saying, I want to talk as a sibling. And I would have told my siblings, I'm going. I would have told my mom, I'm going. If anybody else wants to come with me, let's go have a consult, because this is what Dad wants. But what are we walking into?
Right. Right. So he didn't want that information. He didn't want to take that in or carry it. But there wasn't any reason that you guys, as his caregiving system, could not be educated on it. Yes. I can see how that would have been very smart. But at the time, all you could see in front of you was he was incredibly sick.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be in a place where he actually was asking for something very simple, and yet it was very complicated for you guys to manage.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you're not trained on the gurgling in the mouth. You're not trained on, the extra breaths or the no breaths, and you're not trained in that.
Right.
And so that was really scary. That was really scary. And sure, you can be walked through it, and we were Googling things and watching videos. It was like a MASH unit almost. And you should see what Helen's face looks like, you all, because yeah, it was. But on the flip side, I would do it again if I had to, because I love my dad. And that's what his wishes were.
Yeah. You honored him. That's an incredible thing to be. You gave him an incredible gift at the end of his life. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think I told you this already, Helen. It's amazing how even when they're comatose, they hear you.
Right.
We played my dad's, oh my gosh, I can't even remember what. My dad liked Gunsmoke and all of those crazy cowboy movies and all of that. We played his music that he loved. He named my brother John Wayne. So that's how intensive cowboy he was. And so my brother's name is John. His middle name is Wayne. So, and we played his music. And then my mom had said, Jim, I'm going to go take a shower, and then I will be right back. Don't leave me yet. And what was the miracle in the whole situation? Within 30 minutes after my mom got back from her shower, my dad passed away that evening.
He waited for her.
He waited for her.
Yeah. I love it. There's a lot of anecdotal information. There's not really evidence-based science and data, but what we do know is that people seem to feel the presence and they seem to recognize milestones. They'll wait for that family member to come in before they die. They'll wait to get past an anniversary or a birthday or some special date. Again, it's anecdotal, but we see it happen all the time. There's some sort of awareness, and it can't be a physical thing. It has to be a spiritual issue is the only thing I can say about that.
Yes.
Cathy, you've had a lot of caregiving experience. Your husband,
Mm-hmm.
And both your parents, losing both your parents and acting as their caregiver. How have you created meaning in your life following the death of your parents?
Yeah, that was a really hard one for me to really wrap my head around. But I think the whole meaning of really the whole end of life thing was that I provided this beautiful gift to my parents. They raised me. They brought me into the world. They were the strictest parents in the world. And my dad was so disciplined and my mom was so outspoken, but it's meaningful because I got to be with them, with my siblings. And it was just the five of us, as we were when we were young, the five of us sitting at the kitchen table every night, and the five of us together with my dad and being there and sharing our stories. And then after my dad had left, it was funny because my mom had my picture of dad next to her bed every day. And so my dad's picture was there when she had left, and it had lipstick on it was a canvas, and it had lipstick stains because she would kiss him every night for the last 3 years. So my dad looked like he had lipstick on that canvas, but he was there in spirit, and the four of us were together. And so it was just this beautiful gift. And that's how I'm just going to remember us, is we were all together while we were growing up. I'm going to cry. And then we were all together at the very end, and we honored their wishes as best as we possibly could. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. That's end of life done right, Cathy. Truly is.
It is.
So, to me, another way you have created meaning after your experience as a caregiver and ongoing experience with your husband is you have a podcast that is designed to support caregivers. It's called the Caregiver Cup.
Yes.
Where did that name come from? Why the name Caregiver Cup?
Yeah, when you think about a caregiver and you think about the advice, if you're a caregiver, what do people say to you? Don't forget to take care of yourself. Put your oxygen mask on first. And I was the one always like, yeah, right. How can I care for myself when my husband's in one chemotherapy chair at one time and my dad is in the chemotherapy chair at the other time? This is the worst case nightmare ever, right?
Right.
So I thought about this, and I wanted to do a podcast that would support women caregivers and get them to understand, to see the importance of making sure they fill their cup every day. Trust me, I love my coffee cups, so that might have swayed into it. But we fill our cup each and every day. But what do we do with that cup when we fill it? We usually pour it out and help other people. And our cup goes empty. And so I wanted to go ahead and have this podcast to share the importance of making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And every single person is different. If I talk to you, Helen, and we talk to myself, we all take care of ourselves different. And so we all have to figure out, in those challenging times, how are you going to take care of yourself? What are you going to do? It might be something as simple as, I'm going to drink extra water today because I need to make sure I stay hydrated. It may be, I'm going to walk to the mailbox and just breathe in the fresh air for a few minutes before I go back and sit by my mom's bedside. It may be able to say, asking, your brother or your sister or my husband to go pick up a meal because I'm exhausted and I don't have time to make the meal. So I really want caregivers to go ahead and see the importance of filling their cup, and if possible, keeping that cup full all the time. Keeping that cup full. And how do you do that each and every time? And we may not be able to go out and walk a mile every day, or we may not be able to go out and socialize with our friends, which fills our cup. So how are we going to fill our cup instead? And that might be a text to a friend to say, hey, I just needed to, talk to you. How are you doing? Tell me something else that's going on in the world.
I love it.
Yeah. So I'm pretty new to the to the podcast scene. I've only been doing it for 2 years. But what the golden nugget is, I did it right in the middle of the pandemic. I did it right in the middle of when, I just lost my dad. I'm caregiving for my mom. My husband's going through chemotherapy, but I thought, I need to practice this. And what a better way is to start talking about it.
That's perfect. That's amazing to share the experience, not just the wisdom that you learned along the way, but actually living it as you're talking about it. I'm not sure a lot of podcasters have done that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's an amazing gift to your listeners. So why just women?
I think, and that's a good question, Helen. I'm toying with that right now. But I think that women tend to not put themselves first. I think women have more of the guilt of and the nurturing aspect and the people-pleasing aspect. And so I wanted to focus on that piece. Not saying that the podcast can't help men, but I think that what I've been finding is women will say, I can manage through this without anything. I can get through this. And then when the season is done, I'll come back and take care of myself. Oh. Yes.
And we know that's more than likely not true. And there's a lot of wear and tear that happens while you wait to get through a season.
Oh my gosh, yes. I can tell you horror stories because, I mean, my body, my physical body went through so much, and I'm still trying to recover physically and mentally from 5.5 years.
Sure.
And, you're going to have caregiver stress. It's going to lead to caregiver burnout, and it may even lead to compassion fatigue. And so there's 3 levels of caregiver stress that you have to be aware of.
Yes.
And put that yellow flag up or the red flag up when it gets bad.
Well, the workforce, the caregiving workforce, I think is about 85% female. So there are a lot of women around the country doing that. And even in the US in 2023, I think there's still a default to the daughter is the caregiver, or the unmarried daughter is the caregiver, or the only daughter is the caregiver. Yeah. I think that happens still. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we've gotten away from that like we should have. Although I will say I have seen sons, men's spouses that are amazing caregivers. But I think by and large, we do have more women that are doing the caregiving than we do men.
And what really surprises me, Helen, now is more women are caregiving earlier in their life because maybe they had children later in their life. And I see a lot of, I don't know if the official word is sandwich caregiver or not, but women that are caregiving a parent and still have children at home.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And they might even have the parent moved into their own home.
Yes.
So they've got children and parents. Yes, definitely sandwich caregivers. The stress of that, I can't even imagine.
Can't either.
So how can my listeners connect with you and the work that you're doing to support the caregiver community?
Yeah, I want to invite you to follow the Caregiver Cup podcast. Give a few listens a try for you, and you can see the titles out there. So pick the titles that fit where you're at right now and just start listening. I think that's the biggest thing. There are so many resources from a podcast perspective that you can go ahead and do. I think too, caregivers get to the point where they're so busy. If you put something else on their plate, that's going to be overwhelming. But maybe you're doing the dishes. Put that on, or maybe you're in the shower. That's where I listen to most of my podcasts, is when I'm getting ready in the morning, or I'm going for my walk in the morning now that I have the luxury of doing that. The second thing that I've created is a caregiver circle. It's called the Caregiver Cup Circle because I wanted to keep the cup name in it, but it's a monthly membership where caregivers can join, and we get together 2 times a month on Zoom, and we just have conversations. What's working this week? What's not working this week? And there's no doubt we're going to talk about how are you taking care of yourself this week, or how are you not? And there's no guilt. There's no shame if you're not taking care of yourself, but we want to encourage you to take baby steps to try to do that, depending on what season people are in. I have people in the circle that are taking care of a spouse. I have people in the circle that are newly married and their loved one has cancer. I have people taking care of a parent. And so it's nice to be able to hear people have the same issues and the challenges that you do. And we come together without judgment, and we lift each other up. we cry, we laugh, we get serious, and we really just talk about whatever's on their mind. Obviously, I have a theme if nobody talks, but that's never happened before. So I become the quiet facilitator most of the time, and I just let people let's talk about where you're at. That may be the only meeting or connection people have in the whole entire week, is a Zoom call that we get on, and they get to go ahead and see the friend that they met 2 weeks ago, and they can go ahead and converse and start talking. And that just gives them a little bit of time away and realization. I also do one-on-one coaching if somebody needs to map out their personal plan. And hopefully we'll just keep kind of plotting down the course and growing as we go. But that's where I'm at.
Awesome. What's your website, Cathy, so people can go straight to your work?
I'm Cathy with a C, so it's CATHYL as in Larry, Van, VAN, @gmail.com.
Well, I will have it all in my show notes. So
Okay.
I'll make sure that they can go into the show notes and find you immediately. Your podcast is awesome. Where can they find your podcast?
Yeah, just go to your podcast site and search for the Caregiver Cup, and you can find it out there. I had to put a T in front of it because the Caregiver Cup is also a golf outing. So, you know how sometimes they have names, and so the Caregiver Cup. And so if you bring up Caregiver Cup, you may find a golf outing. So we have to do the Caregiver Cup.
Awesome. I got you. My podcast name is actually the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So Cathy, thank you for being so transparent, so honest, and sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly of your caregiving experiences. I'm so privileged to get to know you.
Yes. And yeah, same to you. I'm so glad I found you. It's almost like it was like coming back home again to my mom's last few days. And so it felt good. It felt grieving, painful, but then also I leave now today with a smile. So thank you.
So now you see why Cathy's story has so many different nuances to it, so many different perspectives. Professionals, end-of-life workers, you need to hear her story because we don't always get it right. And it's okay if we make mistakes, but it's good to be self-aware and to know the things that bother or don't really uphold our patients and families very well. And if you're a personal caregiver, you can be inspired by Cathy's story. You need to remember she didn't have any experience and any training. And even though there are things that she would do differently, she felt like they had done a good job taking care of her dad and taking care of her mom. So you can catch up with Cathy on cathylvan.com, and that's Cathy with a C. Her podcast is called The Caregiver Cup. You can find it on all the podcast platforms. You can check out her on her website on cathylvan.com to find the Caregiver Circle groups. You can sign up for that. They meet via Zoom twice a month. And then you can also connect with Cathy to check out her coaching. She helps support other women who are caregivers. She has her services there on her website. So check out cathylvan.com. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send me your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.